Hello and welcome to The World This Week. I'm Jonathan Steele. European Union foreign ministers met this week to discuss the war in Syria. After tense discussions, pressure from Britain and France led to the lifting of the EU's embargo against sending arms to the Syrian rebels. In part one of the programme today, we ask, is this a game changer for the conflict? For the second part of the show, we'll be looking at the riots in Sweden. Has the country lost its charm? But first, Europe emerged divided when Britain and France refused this week to agree to a renewal of the arms embargo against the Syrian opposition. Although the 25 other EU members wanted to keep it, Britain argued that the threat of arming the rebels would force President Assad to the negotiating table in Geneva next month, and by channeling weapons to more moderate groups would reduce the opposition's reliance on extremist factions like al-Nusra, who are affiliated to al-Qaeda. Other countries maintained that providing arms would simply allow the violence to escalate even further and promote an arms race. Alex MacDonald has more.
The slaughter in Syria continues unabated. Rebel and government forces seem to have reached a stalemate, with neither side able to maintain any ground captured for any length of time. For Britain and France, the collapse of the EU embargo on arms to the country this week will seek to address that imbalance. Far from holding Europe-wide support, the ban will expire automatically due to Britain and France's unwillingness to agree unanimously with the other 25 EU member states' decision to renew the ban. Their decision to veto the renewal provoked scorn from other EU countries. However, the British Foreign Minister William Hague praised the outcome, which will still leave other sanctions on the Syrian regime in exchange for the lifting of the arms embargo.
The European Union has agreed to bring to an end the arms embargo on the Syrian opposition and to maintain other sanctions on Syria, all the other existing sanctions on the Syrian regime. This is the outcome that the United Kingdom wanted. It has been difficult for many nations, of course. That is why we've had such long discussions today over the last 12 or 13 hours or so. But I think it is the right decision.
The EU has ruled, however, that no arms can be sent to the rebels before August. Russia has criticised the lifting of the embargo, claiming it would undermine a peace conference planned in June in Geneva. They also announced plans to send an advanced missile system to the Assad regime to deter, in its own words, any hotheads from doing anything rash. As if acting on cue, Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon responded ominously, threatening action.
Obviously, from our perspective, it is a threat at this stage. I cannot affirm that things have been expedited. The shipments are not on their way yet. This I can say. I hope they will not leave, and if God forbid they reach Syria, we will know what to do.
The intervention of the Lebanese Hezbollah on the side of the regime has provoked calls from Britain for the group to be banned as a terrorist organisation by the EU. In addition, the United States has issued a warning to the Iran-backed group, demanding they withdraw their fighters from the country, following a US-drafted resolution by the UN Human Rights Council condemning the defence of Assad's regime by foreign fighters.
We condemn in the strongest terms Hassan Nasrallah's recent declarations confirming Hezbollah militants' active role in the fighting in Qusayr and other parts of Syria. This is an unacceptable and extremely dangerous escalation. We demand that Hezbollah withdraw its fighters from Syria immediately.
Hezbollah's most prominent intervention in the conflict so far has been helping the Syrian regime regain control of the western city of Al-Qusayr from rebel forces. Control of the city by rebels would have provided them with a supply base from which it might be possible to cut off an escape by Assad from Damascus to the Alawite-dominated coastal region. In case of a sectarian breakup of the country, it is likely that Assad would seek to establish a new state in this region. There are many voices who claim arming the rebels now would be to provoke a bloodbath. There are just as many who argue that not arming them will provoke a bloodbath. Most Syrians will agree, though, that a bloodbath is already well underway, whether the West intervenes or not. Alex MacDonald, Islam Channel.
Britain and France only want arms to be sent to the moderate Syrian National Coalition and its allies in the Free Syrian Army. But many fear weapons could easily end up in the wrong hands. With me in the studio to discuss this and other questions about the end of the arms embargo for Syria and the countries that surround it are Nebal Istanbouly, welcome, a supporter of the Syrian National Council here in London, and Charles Shoebridge, a security analyst and former intelligence officer. Welcome to you too. Let me start with you, Nebal Istanbouly. You're a supporter or member of the Syrian National Coalition here in London, representing them here in London. What is the value of lifting the arms embargo at this stage? If you've got a Geneva conference coming up, doesn't it run against the spirit of negotiations?
Good afternoon and good evening, first of all. And first of all, let's talk about the embargo itself, lifting the embargo itself. What the point of it? Nowadays, we're over 2 years now. Syrian civilians, Syrian peaceful people were killed over more than 2 years now. More than 100,000 of people have been killed now. First of all, the lifting of the embargo has not started or been implemented yet. And as you showed in your report, the implementation or the applying this won't take place before August. But Syrian people need to defend themselves against the missiles being shot by, or the bombing or the aircrafts being used against them. They have the right to defend for themselves, for their kids, for their women, for all civilians or peaceful civilians who are being killed all over 2 years now, as I mentioned. So, but when we're talking about the lifting of the embargo, don't forget, please, that many countries are still against this step. One of them, or the most important two of them, are Germany and Austria. So even like the decision was taken, but it's not applicable yet, it's not applied yet, and we are waiting for the implement of this this decision.
But how are you going to prevent these weapons that are given to you ending up in the hands of Jabhat al-Nusra, this affiliated to al-Qaeda, that group?
Yeah, as you mentioned, like there are many parties or fighters inside Syria who are fighting, who are revolutionists. They are fighting for their rights. They are fighting for their lives. So you can Free Syrian Army is there. We all know how to contact, whom to contact as well. All countries, all nations, or even like all governments knows where to go and whom to contact and whom to give those weapons to. So,
well, Charles Shoebridge, let me come to you on this question of being sure where the arms end up. Do you think the British government or the French government, if they send arms, can really be sure that they won't end up with al-Qaeda?
Absolutely, they cannot be sure of this. This is a war zone. It's been a very complicated situation on the ground. Multiple groups, tens of different groups in tens of different areas have control. Sometimes they don't. It's a very rapidly changing and confusing situation on the ground. Furthermore, it's very notable, I think, that reporters, for example, even for The Guardian and many others, BBC, have repeatedly reported and increasingly reported that the bulk of the main and certainly the most successful fighting forces of the coalition of, if you like, the loose coalition of forces fighting Assad are indeed of the al-Nusra variety. Now, our representative here, I certainly don't doubt his motives in any way, nor indeed many of those of the SNC sitting currently in Istanbul trying to find a joint position to present to peace talks. But the fact is that it's almost a consensus now that they are of very limited relevance to the rebels on the ground. We're talking about the Syrian National Coalition. Only a couple of days ago, an umbrella group of the rebels actually fighting on the ground, the people who would actually be those who eventually will receive these weapons, have actually rejected the SNC in all but name as their representatives. And so really we've got multiple questions here. We've got questions, who are these moderates that we keep hearing about from the SNC and from liberal journalists in this country and other countries? Who are these moderates actually on the ground? Because the evidence suggests that there are not many of them. And secondly, as you mentioned, how do you control the flow of weapons to these people, particularly since the most important thing for the SNC and others is the overthrow of Assad. And the SNC has, moderate though it may well be in its statements, certainly to the West, has repeatedly refused to condemn its al-Nusra and al-Qaeda allies, notwithstanding that these are banned groups by the United States, for example.
How do you respond to that? Why haven't you condemned the
I just
al-Nusra people?
would like to mention that, when it started, and a few days ago, I think Guardian reported that even al-Nusra or such forces, they are not more than thousands of people when you compare them with the FSC, Free Syrian Army. And we all know that Free Syrian Army are people who are fighting for themselves, for their lives, and they are tenth of thousand, and all of them are moderate. So how come we say
but what about dealing with the point, why don't you condemn al-Nusra and say we don't want anything to do with them because they're al-Qaeda?
To be honest, nowadays for the SNC, there are lots of issues much more important than this issue, first of all. And secondly, I would like to ask another question for this issue. Why straight away all countries reported that al-Nusra are terrorists? I'm not debating this issue now, but why they straight away reported that al-Nusra as a terrorist group, while Hezbollah is very much intervened in Syria, and still we ask to consider it as terrorist group, but it's not as all.
So please,
but just on that, as a factual point, for example, al-Nusra is listed by the US as a terrorist organization, but my understanding is that in the EU, for example, the UK, it is not listed. Hezbollah, my understanding, is listed by the United States as a terrorist organization. So we have some equivalence.
Yeah, but here in this case, I'll come back to you and ask, if there is a kind of differences or negotiation between the EU and the United States about deciding either al-Nusra are terrorists or not. How come you come to Syrian National Coalition, who has got lots of issues to discuss,
but we are not sending arms to Hezbollah. That's the point. We're not suggesting that we should be supplying arms to Hezbollah. In the same way, we shouldn't be supplying arms to the SNC. First of all, who have very little representation on the ground, and I'm getting that even from what Syria rebels say. And secondly, have no means of controlling these very dangerous, of course, naturally lethal weapons that will go to anybody that wants them.
And I do agree with you, but as I said, SNC deals with the most moderate powers inside Syria, which is the Free Syrian Army, and they are not even al-Nusra, they admitted that they are not supported by the SNC. So then you come back to say that if we armed the SNC or the Free Syrian Army, the weapons would or may go to.
Well, let me get on to the politics of the opposition and the Geneva Conference, because that is really the potential game changer. Also, you repeatedly said that the Syrian National Council is moderate. But when a delegation of secular moderates in exile, like Michel Quilot from Paris, tried to go to Istanbul to take part in the SNC and enlarge the delegation of secular people, not Islamists, secular people, in the SNC, they were rejected and they walked out in dismay. I mean, how can you call yourselves moderate if you're rejecting these secular allies who are in exile, long history of opposition to the Assad family?
Okay, I just I'm not in a very, let's say, known about what's going on, because they are still the meetings are still going on in Turkey, in Istanbul, till today as well. They haven't finished yet, but what I would say, they accepted all parties, but it's I'm not a part of the SNC, the Syrian National Coalition. They should gather all together and then have a kind of vote about the nominated people to enter the SNC. So it's a kind of election rather than let's say, picking up. So,
but will the SNC actually take part in Geneva? Because we've just heard them making the statement that if Hezbollah and Iran are not withdrawn from Syria, they won't take part.
That's what I was about to mention. But first of all, I would like to remind you about who made this statement. It's George Sabra. He's non-Muslim. He's Christian. So SSC accepts all Syrian oppositions wherever their background is. This is the first issue. Secondly, yeah, regarding this issue, Syria now is under an invasion of Iran, to be honest, of Iran and Hezbollah. So how come you say that we should negotiate with Assad's regime? And then, like Hezbollah and Iran, all the world knows the intervention of Hezbollah and Iran in the Syrian issue, and then you would expect us to sit with the Syrian regime while they saying that we are fighting against terrorists. We are not going to negotiate about Assad stepping back or...
But then Assad could also say that, couldn't he? Because after all, it seems a bit rich and hypocritical that at the moment, perhaps for good reason, and for example, United Nations Human Rights Council has also, of course, condemned Hezbollah as foreign fighters' involvement in this situation. But this is only the situation on Assad's side, which the opposition has had for some 2 years. You've repeatedly got foreign fighters going to fight for the Syrian opposition, for the SNC, for the Free Syrian Army. Al-Nusra, for example, is largely comprised of foreign fighters. Doctors, for example, from Aleppo, even a year ago, were reporting that the majority of people they were dealing with who were injured, this was a report, for example, in The Guardian a year ago, are foreign fighters. So this issue of foreign fighters is condemned on both sides, and it's certainly not for the opposition now to say we are not going to take part in negotiation to end a conflict that is killing thousands of people simply because the situation now is reversed, whereas you've always had foreign fighters on your side, but Assad's side has not. Surely you should be negotiating to stop this suffering of the entire Syrian nation.
Yeah, we all would like to stop this suffering of all the Syrian nation, but the major question or the key question is who is killing Syrian civilians? Is it the revolutions? Is it like
any kind of, both sides kill both sides? No. And it's certainly not the case, as we often hear, that of course I'm no supporter of Assad. That is clear. Therefore, we are not opposite in that way. I'm a Democrat, and I would support democratic elections in Syria, which I would
fighting
say
for democracy.
Well, you say you're fighting for democracy,
Yep.
but I don't think that is the case in Syria. I think the majority of people, or certainly a very substantial portion of the Syrian opposition, is not interested at all in democracy. It's very rare that you hear any mention of concepts around democracy, inclusive democracy, secular democracy, women's rights, or any of these things. I'm not talking about from the SNC.
Okay.
I'm talking about from the people on the ground doing the fighting, making the videos, people who are capturing, laying down their lives for their vision of a future Syria, which is not the same vision as the SNC has. That's the problem.
It's not a real problem, to be honest, because you may be like, you may have been watching some videos, but you have not been watching all the videos coming from the side of the Free Syrian Army.
These are the videos I watch repeatedly.
Yeah, some of them, yeah. I condemn that there are some videos exactly as you mentioned, but not all of them. Most of them are moderate.
And but what do you mean by moderate? Do you mean in favour of parliamentary inclusive democracy?
Definitely.
Well, where are these people speaking? They're not there.
They're not speaking. They are fighting for themselves.
But
they are
not
interviewing. You've got to have a political programme.
First
of all, Geneva is about a political programme. I mean, you can't just say we're fighting because a lot of civilians are being killed. One way to stop that is to have a political programme and negotiations. So are there any circumstances in which you would go to Geneva if Assad has not previously resigned?
Sorry, can you repeat your question if you don't mind?
You keep saying that Assad has to resign before there can be negotiations. Is that still your position? In other words, you are sabotaging negotiations because it's clear he's not going to resign.
Okay, that's what we are talking about. What we are talking about. You just said that we are not asking Assad to resign before. Like going to Geneva, but it's Syrian revolution started asking to Assad to step back, to resign, but he's not. Just the Syrian regime said that it's not. They are not going to negotiate about Assad's resigning at all. So if we are not like, if we are not going to negotiate about the issues that people, the Syrians, the revolutionists, ask for, fight for, the democracy they want. So what's the point of going to Geneva?
That isn't quite the case, though, is it? Because at the moment we've got the Syrian side at the prompting of the Russians, very much so, and the Russians are, if you like, speaking for the Syrians in many ways, really actually saying, yes, in principle we'll attend, but we don't expect much to happen there. But on the other side, you've got the opposition, which is, as the talks become closer, and they've actually got to put their cards on the table, the opposition are coming up with more and more reasons why they shouldn't go there. And indeed, this brings us back to the initial subject, which of course is about the arming, because Britain and France have made it clear in the last few days that the reason why they're saying they may arm the rebels is to put pressure on Assad to actually go to negotiating table. But he's already said through the Russians that in principle that will happen. It's the opposition that are refusing to go there or lay conditions. And furthermore, it's the French and the British. Long before, about 2 weeks ago, they adopted this negotiated outcome position, because this was an American proposal echoing what the Russians have been asking for years, that there should be negotiations. It's Britain and France that have constantly proposed that they should be arming the Syria rebels. So it's only the last 2 weeks that it's been their policy that we should have this conference. So it's probably not true.
I would agree with you, but what's the point of, let's say, not arming the Syrian rebels and keeping the war like this? Because in this case, you won't be able to convince the Syrian regime that they should sit to the negotiation at all, because they are getting support from Russia, China as well, and Iran and Hezbollah. They are fighting with them and for them. So how come if you don't make a balance in power between the Free Syrian Army, between the rebels and the Syrian regime, and then you...
But the rebels are getting back in front...
Let me just ask you a final question, because we're beginning to run out of time. Why do you think Britain and France are taking the position they do? I mean, the US seems to have moved to a more moderate position.
Correct.
Why are Britain and France taking this line?
It could be their relationship with Saudi Arabia, Qatar. They have extraordinarily close relationships with these two countries, which, of course, are in the forefront of backing rebels, which, again, should really make us question why these countries that have got nothing to do with democracy in their own countries would be backing people who want democracy in Syria. But it may be that France and, because repeatedly Saudi Arabia, Qatar, particularly Saudi Arabia, have called on Britain and France to arm the rebels. But in the long term, of course, this could cause conflict with Saudi Arabia, because, of course, the Saudi Arabians are backing the more militant people. If we were to start backing these moderates, if we can find them, then, of course, after the fall of Assad, it could be a whole new civil war between moderates and so-called moderates and so forth.
But like, with my respect to his opinion, what about the Syrian people? What about the Syrian people? It's the revolution of Syrian people. It has nothing to do with Qatar and Saudi Arabia, USA, even the UK. We thank all the governments and people who support Syrians, but what's going on in Syria seems that some people will started forgetting that Syrian people started a revolution against Assad's regime. So it's an internal issue rather than
but your revolution also does not, without elections, have the right to speak for the Syrian people. But
I think we're running out of time. I mean, it is an internal issue, but it has become a regional issue. It's become a proxy issue. It's become
but don't forget that the only side who gets the whole support and the whole pressure to for his benefit is Assad's regime getting all support, or fighters even from Hezbollah and Iran as well.
The bloodshed continues, we should talk.
On this note, I'm sorry to have to cut you off, Charles Shoebridge and Nebal Istanbouly. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And please stay with us for the second part of the programme about the riots in Sweden.
Oh.